From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Rockstar. We'll see Sherry again tomorrow night. Now, I know it's a day old and you've seen it 1,000 times. But when the Prime Minister was booed at the tennis last night, does it mean he's about to lose office? No, but it is a sign of what I have been talking about for months, was that Australians had to send a message through the polls, through their local politicians, or at events like this, that the Prime Minister ain't the chosen one and he ain't even the naughty boy. He is a mischievous politician who has gone out of his way to lie his way into the type of Prime Minister that he would end up being. Now, we knew this. We talked about it all the way through the campaign, and many, if not most people watching, would have agreed that Australia was hiring a bloke for the job who was not the guy who really was going to take over the job. But I've got to say, a year is a long time in Australian politics in particular, because last night the Prime Minister, who believes that he's on track already to a second term after his first couple of months of polling, well, he's been brought right back to earth.
It seems the Prime Minister's broken promise on stage 3 tax cuts has not passed the tennis test.
The Prime Minister was reminded of the broken promise at the Australian Open.
Prime Minister denying a hostile reception at the Australian Open last night was linked to Labor's recent decisions.
As I say, I know you've seen it 1,000 times, but why not 1,001? A Melbourne crowd in lefty Victoria turning on a Prime Minister.
The Australian Prime Minister, the Honourable Anthony Albanese. The Deputy Victorian Premier, the Honourable Ben Carroll. Thank you.
And all days, as lefties like to do, they're trying to tell us that you didn't hear what you heard. The boos were more like boo-earns and people were fighting back against the boos. And then you've heard this thing how many times today?
It's a well-worn Australian tradition, and I don't think we should read too much into it.
What are they booing him for? Because, well, we've got a heap of rich people over there watching the tennis finals there, and they've had a bit of their tax taken off them.
Did you expect that, Elbo?
Oh, it's a bit of tradition in Australian sport, isn't it?
It is.
Now, of course, all of that's true because multiple Prime Ministers, for as long as we can all remember, at some point they were booed. Of course, it was fans multiple times doing it to the former Prime Minister in Scott Morrison. Way back, it was Kevin Rudd being booed when he went to a footy match. Before that, Tony Abbott and John Howard even get booed at a memorial service. But this is why it matters. It's not scientific. It doesn't mean the next election is Albo's that he's already lost. But 12 months ago, when we were just as critical as we are now, we knew that the Prime Minister spent more time he spent 3 days at the tennis as opposed to the previous couple of days where he had only spent a few hours on the ground in Alice Springs dealing with the real issues that ultimately ended up being why Australia went from the feel-good 60-40 when it came to the referendum of the reality of people not believing that it would have a practical outcome and a no that ended up at 60-40. You see, the Prime Minister, after visiting Alice Springs because he was forced to by the reality, what he really wanted to do last year was to put his feet up and accept the cheers of an adoring crowd. And that's exactly what happened 12 months ago. The only reason the booing is a story is because last year was the exception to the rule. And this was the moment for the Prime Minister when he was introduced, same tournament, same time, same lefty state, Victoria, last year.
Someone from the crowd yelled, "Give us a wave, Elbo, our Prime Minister," and he's obliged.
And he loved it. Remember, 3 days. 3 days at the tennis last year. He didn't turn up until the final because he knew how it looked last year. Sitting back while Australia was actually going through its cost of living crisis even harder than it's going through now. Hanging out with the ice creams, making the most of his time with the tennis brass, and even sitting with the bloke who runs Channel 9, but most famously was, of course, one of the best treasurers the country has ever had. So is the booing the biggest story in Australia? No. But is it a sign of how the Prime Minister's fortunes have changed in 12 months? You bet. Now, if you're looking for an example on the Liberal side of things, remember just after the 2019 election, Scott Morrison went to the Sharks and he was cheered. The same man was then booed closer to the 2022 election. So is it the biggest story in the world? No. Is it a sign that people view the Prime Minister as just the same as every other dud politician? Yes. Does it ever go back to where they cheer you again? No. Now, in part, one of the reasons why the booing took place was because the Prime Minister has gone missing when it came to the cost of living situation. Last year, he took $1,500 out of 10 million workers. Last week, the plan was for the media to absolutely flood the zone with conversation about tax cuts. Now, yes, there was a broken promise, and I'll get to that in a second, but of course the idea was that wherever you turned your television on, you would see someone somewhere talking about tax cuts. And eventually, if everyone everywhere is talking about it, then even if the detail doesn't work for you, even if the reality was the broken promise, the message the Australian media would try to send to people is here's Albo and he's here to help. But I was thinking about why this thing is going to land flat if it hasn't already. And it comes down to this one. It's too little, too late. You see, the cost of living problem has been so for about 18 months. And while you're supposed to be thankful for a Prime Minister who finally gets it, loan repayments have gone up anywhere between $14,500 a year for a $500,000 mortgage to more than $30,000 if you've got a $1 million mortgage. The reality is that while the Prime Minister and all the media says he pulled a rabbit out of the hat last week, how many stories have you read that look like this one? That Australians' reaction to power price surges of up to 83% meant that, as we showed you last year, all sorts of people are trying to find innovative ways to save on their power bills, including the poor bugger who would turn it off at the mains and only turn it on for 15 minutes at the start of the day, a little bit for lunch, and then he wouldn't have it on at night. On top of that, the reality in the last inflation figures that, yes, were the lowest overall headline inflation figure in 2 years, and while that had a 4 in front of it, how many other things that you can't avoid that cost you hundreds of dollars had gone up compared to the previous 12 months? Well, you can see here that when it comes to gas and other household fuels, 12.5% increase. Electricity, 10% increase. Bread and cereal products, not that you can avoid those, that's up by double the inflation rate. Rents, again, way higher than the inflation rate. General food, dairy, all higher than the inflation rate that the government was patting itself on the back for as being the lowest in 2 years. This is why 4/5 of bugger all, some crumbs off the table, are not enough to actually change people's lives. Instead, the hope is to change the political fortunes. Because remember, when they had taken $1,500 away from 10 million workers who were facing bigger bills than they had in the best part of a decade or maybe even longer, the Prime Minister was telling us that he was helping.
Now, we are doing something about cost of living.
Our primary motivation here is giving more people help with the cost of living.
You can't say that you're concerned about cost of living pressure and then refuse to do anything about it. My government is a government of solutions.
We acknowledge that people are under pressure, but more than acknowledge it, we are doing something about it.
But of course, that's all the smoke and mirrors. They took $1,500 off you. They are not giving $1,500 back. And when I say back, I mean it's your money anyway. But again, today, some examples about the reality of cost of living versus the spin of we're doing something about cost of living. This report came out from welfare services, particularly focused in on Queensland, where incredibly distressing, the cost of living crisis is plunging Queenslanders into debt. Working Queensland families are spending $200 more than they earn each week. Remember that? $200 more than they earn each week on the bare essentials. The extent of the crisis has been laid bare in a new report from the Queensland Council of Social Services, which shows families are falling more than $10,000 into debt each year because they're doing things like using personal loans or credit cards. The key number, Queensland families $200 a week, more than they earn on the expenses to keep a roof over their head, their kids in new school uniforms and food on the table. Meantime, another one here, this one from the ACTU. Now, they're trying to make a point about casual workers being able to transfer into becoming full-time workers, but the devil in the detail helps make the point that I am trying to this evening. Cost of living pressures are increasingly being cited by insecure workers, so that's things like gig workers or casual workers, as reasons they're not taking time off, even when they're injured. When likely to be dismissed by employers, the latest survey shows that 69% of people say that affordability, keeping the money coming in, is the reason they keep going to work even when they're hurt. So if the reality is that $200 a week is more than you are spending than the money you earn in a place like working Queensland, the tax return that the Prime Minister wants you to thank him for doesn't get anywhere near $200 a week. Certainly even for the people that have been most screwed over by this, the rich people earning over $180,000. Now, I notice, by the way, Jackie Lambie talks about rich people. Well, she's one of them because she earns more than that number. But working Queenslanders spending $200 more than they earn. Well, $14, $15, $22, $32 and $41 is not going to do a damn thing. Frankly, it's like fighting a bushfire with a bucket. So you see, for the Prime Minister, he gets to say, we're doing something. For the press gallery, they get to say, well, the Prime Minister says they're doing something and the overall cost of this thing is X billion dollars a year. But if the reality is a family spending $200 more than they are earning, the tax cut doesn't touch the sides. People know it. They know, of course, the politics in and around it is a lie, and that's why people are turning on the Prime Minister. And further to this, remember, for as long as Albo was the opposition leader, we've been talking about how he's each way. Perfect example would be voting in the Parliament to kill off JobKeeper and then going out and whinging that JobKeeper had ended. Perfect example. We back in the stage 3 tax cuts in the Parliament, despite the fact that in the lead up to the vote we were saying that we opposed them. This was the each way Albo. But another reason why people are having their issues with the Prime Minister right now is that he is not what he promised to be. Now, I know that every Prime Minister, and I've seen some as close as you can get, and I've seen some who wouldn't even think about setting a Christmas card on fire, let alone actually sending one to me. But Prime Ministers all at some point start to think that if they throw more of themselves at something, then the problem will magically get better. But when they are eventually the problem, more of them only exacerbates the problem. They also magically think that Australians are so desperately in love with them personally that just like a member of their family, they will forgive them when they tell lies or they under-deliver on what they promise. But these aren't members of our family. They're not even our colleagues. They're not even our friends. They're not even distant second or third cousins. They're politicians who want more power for themselves, who tell us lies in order to fool people at elections, only to turn around and ignore those people until you need them again to win another election. And here's a couple of examples of where people have had enough of the current Prime Minister. Remember, this was the promise of the bloke when he was applying for the job.
And I do believe that we can do politics better, and I hope to do so.
But the reality was, at the first major test to see whether politics was any different than it was in previous governments, when the finance minister and one of the mean girls, Katie Gallagher, was clearly proven to have lied to the Senate about her connections to who knew what and when, in and around complaints that were made around sexual assault in the Parliament. Did the Prime Minister say, sorry, you didn't tell the truth, bang, you're gone? No, he doubled down. When he promised greater transparency, did all the questions that were taken on notice start being answered? No. Did he open his diary for people to have a look at? No, instead he charged $1,300 for you to apply for the chance to have a look at his diary. And then when the diary eventually turned up, it was only for the first 6 months of his prime ministership, not all the way up until the end of last year or the start of this year. His new politics also fell flat when jobs for the boys became very obvious. There was Kevin Rudd, who was not going to be the ambassador to Washington, but of course became the ambassador to Washington. Then there was the behaviour of the trade minister. Now, the trade minister, Don Farrell, remember, runs, apart from everything else, lots of trade little embassies that are around the world, including one in San Francisco. Now, this is where trade representatives of Australia speak to trade representatives or private companies in places like the country that they're sent to, and they're able to negotiate better deals. But this plum job paid for by us, the taxpayer, didn't go to the person who applied for the job, who an independent committee said should get the job. Instead, it went to a one-term senator who was a factional mate of Don Farrell, who didn't even apply for the job. The person who had been selected for the job even had to turn around and train the political hack who didn't apply for the job to now do the job that she should have had. And then there's the line you've heard how many times in the past few days about the Prime Minister and trust. This was the different guy who was going to always level with you and always be honest.
My word is my bond.
Well, if that's the case, why doesn't he repeat the promise that he made during the election about your power prices?
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
Yet if you ask them point blank to repeat that number today, they will not say it. Why? Because they know they can't deliver it. Instead, it was about lipstick on the pig of the policies that were rejected in the previous election that just got implemented anyway and then supercharged once they were in office. This is a government who says they want Australia to cut its emissions, yet when Australians buy things like hybrid cars, which are better than petrol cars but not as good as electric cars, they've now introduced a luxury car tax of 33 cents in the dollar of every dollar that vehicle costs. So now buying a Toyota hybrid is treated by the tax system as if you were importing a brand new Merc from Germany. That's the reality. Power bills have gone up because they have forced in a demand for an entirely new electricity grid, one that even the CSIRO said would cost $1 trillion to do, and you, the customer, has to pay for it. And then, of course, the centrepiece of the past couple of weeks has been that the broken promise is one of the main issues with the Prime Minister and his changes on tax. Now, remember, I've just illustrated why the changes on tax don't actually change anyone's life. $200 more than the income of the average person in Queensland. The tax cuts are what? $15, $25, $30, $40? He said how many times, and it's way more, by the way, than 15 times, that he said he wasn't going to do anything. But he did it. He changed it. And I can tell you this too, is that to the Labor supporters who think that there's all nuance and context, the reality is that you're the same people who said that Tony Abbott broke his promise when it came to no cuts to the ABC, when in actual fact he didn't cut their funding, he just didn't continually increase the funding. But the context doesn't matter because the lie is proven when people see that there's a difference between words that are said and outcomes that happen. So I was amused to see today the very same people who have lied on so many times and so many different areas. Well, they had to tell us, believe us, when today the push was on to, among other things, change negative gearing. You know, another one of those shortened policies that they had absolutely abandoned, like the environment policy that they reheated. At this last election. Instead, despite the fact that there are MPs pushing for it, it's not going to happen, and you should trust us because you can trust us fingers behind back.
Oh, we're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
And I'll tell you one of the reasons why you can't trust them. Because the very same people who helped inform the decision behind the lie in and around tax are the same people that are now trying to do it when it comes to things like negative gearing. For example, the Australia Institute. It is a Greens think tank. It is a far left-wing think tank, but is often cited by much of the media, and certainly the left-wing media, as an independent source of information about why the current situation is bad. And they have said about negative gearing that the current tax system desperately needs to change. They're also the same people who told us there were 18 different reasons as to why the stage 3 tax cuts had to change. Same experts. Will they get the same outcome? Oh, trust us on this one, but not the last one. Maybe that's what Treasurer Grim Jim Chalmers means when he talks about remaking capitalism. Forget what I promise, watch what I do, and even when I do it, forget what I've actually done, because I promised not to do it. Now, when we came back from summer, I, as part of the look back at summer, told you about some of the stories that dropped in the hope that you wouldn't notice the detail. One of those was a big work that was done by Rex Patrick, the former Centre Alliance and then independent senator from South Australia. He had been pushing for a long time for the Prime Minister to actually open up his diary and tell us who's he meeting with. He's the one that I was referring to that was being charged $1,300 to look at it, and then when they eventually released it at 5 minutes to Christmas, you only got about 6 months of it. Now, interestingly here, print journalists who were afforded the opportunity of a one-on-one meeting with the Prime Minister, not interview, but one-on-one meeting with the Prime Minister, were, among others, The Guardian Australia's political editor, Katharine Murphy, Sydney Morning Herald columnist and self-admitted liar, my edition, not theirs, Nikki Sava, Peter Harcher and James Massola from the Sydney Morning Herald, Peter Van Onselen from Channel 10, the Channel 7 reporter Mark Riley, and the Australian newspapers Greg Sheridan. All of them got one-on-one meetings. The Prime Minister wanted to take their advice, to test the water, as opposed to sit down and do an interview. Now, Katharine Murphy, as you know, was a far-left columnist, received multiple awards for her far-left interpretation of everything from climate change to politics over at the Turnbull Times. Now, what I cannot understand is that this person has gone from being one of the absolute queens of the left, with no one telling her what to say, what to do, and the ability to speak freely on television programs. Now she's given all of that up to work for the Prime Minister. She's going to be in the Prime Minister's office now, whether she's going to be helping work out clever things to say in question time, or whether she's a friendly face to put on the spin of the day to walk around to all the lovies in the press gallery. Who knows, who cares? But it is a weird career decision for somebody who could be invited to every panel in the country for a discussion about the future of politics. Instead, she's decided to go behind doors and work for the Prime Minister, who clearly she thinks is worth giving up her career for. But it's not a surprise. They're having one-on-one meetings. She helps lead the charge of the Get Dutton strategy, which we know Anthony Albanese is going to deploy between now and the next election. Remember, he set up a dirt unit for this. She used to write things like Peter Dutton is Australia's figurehead of fear and fake news, like Trump, but without charisma. So I did love today when Peter Dutton, who just gives no care to the left, and good on him for it. I'm genuinely shocked to see Murphy take up a spot in officially running the lines for Labor. The real outrage is David Crowe missed out. What more must he do to prove his credentials to formally be employed by the Labor Party? Hashtag give Crowe a go. That's a reference to this bloke, David Crowe, who does the political spruiking on the behalf of the Nine newspapers, constantly interviewed in the Insiders program, Radio National, and is always of the left. What is Peter Dutton referring to as always being somebody who's sort of towing the Labor line? Well, it'd be the bloke who wrote this headline after a poll in September last year. Albanese is on track for a second term if he can cement his support. August. He's already giving him a second term. That's when he was being cheered at the tennis, not booed. at the tennis. So who knows who comes next? There's always been a close relationship between people in the media who end up working for politicians. It's one of the problems at state politics right now, particularly in Queensland and Victoria. And Katharine Murphy's not the first person to leave the press gallery to go and work for a Prime Minister. But it is a weird move when she is very high profile and a queen of the left to now work for the king of the centre. I think it gives us an idea about where he is planning to take his government in 2024. Now, a couple of quick ones before we get into the debate tonight. Looking forward to this, Matt Canavan, Nicholas Reece, for the rest of the show. That'll be fun. Of course, school has gone back already in Queensland last week. Shout out to all the kids that are in their second week. And this week, after pupil-free days and all the rest of it, many other states will return kids to school. But we learned today via the Herald Sun about reporting. Now, this reporting shows that there has been a significant number of kids who either don't return to school or actually leave school early. One of the reasons, well, it is all to do with the COVID pandemic, about the stress and anxieties of being locked up at home and the failures of the education system, of course, over multiple years, and particularly in Victoria and Melbourne in particular, we're the world's most locked down city. And as we know, the education results went through the floor in the past year. So I must say I had to notice that one of the people who received an Order of Australia honour in the Australia Day honours was Brett Sutton, the former Chief Health Officer to the Victorian Government, the man who did not recommend a curfew but one happened anyway, the one who stood by as playgrounds were shut down, the one who said you couldn't go to a golf course, the man who was fine with schools being shut down that has resulted in kids having worse performance and some even giving up on school. Yet because he did the right thing by the machine, he ends up getting a little gold medal on his chest to wear around for the rest of his life. In my opinion, a disgrace. Yours, I look forward to it. Send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au, paul@skynews.com.au. Quick break, back with more. Lots to debate, including how the Prime Minister's going to tell us it wasn't a lie, but the reality was that it is, and the reality as well, if people in Queensland are $200 more than the income that's coming in, what's $14 a week going to do anything other than insult them? More in a sec here with Nicholas Reece, Matt Canavan and you here on Paul Murray Live. Glad you're watching this Monday night. Also, just to set the table ever so slightly for how people are responding to the lie and the reality of the bucket for the cost of living bushfire, the Morgan poll has been released today. It shows on primary vote the Labor Party is down to 31% and the LNP is up to 37.5%. There's been a 1.5% drop in the primary for Labor and a 1.5% increase in the support for the LNP. And all over the internet, Labor pollsters are saying, oh, but the margin of error, and carry the one and see what happens. Yeah, OK. They don't normally do that if they get an up by 1.5, do they? All right, let's get into the conversation right now with the man who wants to keep farmers farming, the great senator from Queensland, enjoying the heat. By the way, when I was in Queensland this weekend, it was like 93% humidity and 41 degrees. How's the humidity in Queensland?
Well, Paul, I'm glad you asked. Let me explain the hat. I do want to keep farmers farming, but I'm also doing my bit for the environment. Just got the ceiling fan on. I don't actually have aircon in this room, so it's pretty hot. So the hat's just keeping my locks down there. But it's still very hot and muggy up here in Queensland, but hoping for some rain later in the week.
Yeah, it's a punish, as everyone knows. No doubt, of course, Melbourne, magical, all the rest of it, but the air conditioning blasting away everywhere. Nicholas Reece, in your office, of course, is the Deputy Lord Mayor and our friend. Are you the type of guy who's, following the rules and keeping it at like 22 because that's what Greta wants? Or like me, as low as it can go? If it can go to 17, get it to 17.
Well, we're powered by 100% renewables there at Melbourne Town Hall, Paul. So you can crank it up as cold as you like. You can crank it up as cold as you like, and you still know that you're doing good by the earth. But I'm a little bit worried by Matt Canavan's flag there. It looks to be flapping around. I was wondering if you had one of the kids under the desk just holding it steady,
That's
or
the ceiling fan.
That's. I'm doing my bit. Doing my bit. We've all got to chip in, Nick.
All right, let's talk about what I sort of was mentioning at the start about why people are drifting where they are. Now, again, let's not get overly scientific about crowds booing at sporting events. Yes, they generally boo a Prime Minister. But if 12 months ago they cheer and now they boo, it just shows, OK, back gravity down and you're now back in the realm of normal. And normal is not a great place for an Australian Prime Minister, well, for a very long period of time. The last one was the first to go a full term, and none, of course, have been able to get a second election victory. If that Morgan poll was anywhere near right, well, then that's, of course, a minority government. And then we've got the whole sort of madness of the Teals and the Greens being the tail that wags, presumably, Labor's dog here. But, Matt, again, that reporting out of it wasn't a far right-wing think tank, it was welfare groups that were telling us that people in Queensland, average working families, spending $200 more than they're earning, meaning they're going into $10,000 worth of debt. When the Prime Minister turns around and literally had a talking point for Labor MPs that this is the, and I quote, solution to the cost of living crisis, it could be $14 or $44, it's not going to work. And that's where I think people then start to focus on the lie. And once they think you're a liar in the lodge, ta-da.
Well, exactly right, Paul. I think a lot of Labor people seem shocked that the polls have turned against Labor. I mean, who would have thought that if you broke promises to people, they might turn against you? And to think, I mean, I don't know if they can't do basic maths here, but these tax cuts, so to speak, they're not a cut, they're just returning some of the bracket creep they've taken from you, but they're $15 a week for the average income earner. That's just not going to touch the sides for people. I mean, to think that Australians, the Labor Party must think that Australians are such mugs that they'd sell out integrity and truthfulness for the cost of a Big Mac supersized meal a week. I don't think Australians are that cheap. I definitely think they do care about politicians lying to them, as this Labor government hasn't done so brazenly, almost bragging about the last week that, this is such a beautiful political tactic here to pull the wool over people's eyes. And it's just not enough either. It doesn't help anybody. It's not really going to help at all. People solve the issues when they're paying, on average, $150 more a week, and some people, as you say, much more than that. So I think the Labor Party are going to be in for a rude shock here, because this tax cut change seems to have been designed to try and save the PM's backside in a by-election, not to actually save the household budgets of most Australians.
Well, and of course, even if they get everything that they want, it presumably wouldn't kick in until the 1st of July, which I don't understand how that affects the by-election, apart from the general perception of, are we doing something? Nicholas, again, I mean, I've sat here for how long and talked about the absurdity of the reduction of the $1,500. Yes, it was a dual policy at the last election, but as Scott Morrison sat in this very chair last week, he acknowledged that it would have been, like the proverbial rat up a drain pipe, screaming at them the whole time until it was put back. Obviously, I don't have such ability to communicate with Grim Jim and your mate Albo, but the reality was that decision says, OK, when the joint was on fire, we'll take $1,500 away. Now they want a gold star for giving you $15 back. I just think normal people, when all politics is local and all politics is personal, if you're still financially worse off as a result of the decisions of the government, why will you praise the government?
Well, look, I agree with everyone that the tax cuts alone aren't going to be a cure to the cost of living crisis that Australians are facing. As we know, that's a multifaceted, broad problem that's going to need multiple interventions, and we've got a long way to go on it. I suspect, although the latest inflation figures do look good. But I'm glad Matt brought up the basic mathematics of this, because it is pretty compelling, and what it shows, and we've heard Albanese say this many times, 100% of people are getting a tax cut under the stage 3 tax cuts, but what is less said is that 85% of people, 85% of people are going to be better off, and 15% of people, yes, are going to not do as well as they were under the Morrison take on these tax cuts. Now, look, I'm sure if you're a well-paid senator in the federal parliament or a TV star on Sky News, you're probably in the 15%. You're going to do worse off, and so you can be as mad as you like, and you can even vote against the government at the next election. But the 85% of people who are out there who are going to be better off under these tax cuts compared to what they were previously, they're going to be looking at this and saying, yes, we need help, and Albanese is giving it to us.
Over time, the government's
I think the numbers are pretty compelling.
Boys, just let me for a second here, right? Now, Nicholas, I was thinking about that because which way is he going? Is he going to go there that, I'm just blowing up because it's all about me? No, mate. The reality is that the blow-up is about what I've been since the last federal budget, where I talked about $1,500 for low to middle income workers. Blown about it every night, right? The blow-up about this tax scenario is not about my personal finances. It's about the fact that a bloke that I met this weekend in a farm in Ipswich was trying to do sums on how he could hopefully set a goal of getting 200 grand this year and not have to pay any more tax. He gets screwed over, but even more than that, the people who supposedly everyone cares about, with the people with the bones of their backside, they're getting $15, mate. They're getting $15. Even if you want to spin it up in times 4 for the monthly, it doesn't. I mean, literally, petrol went up by 20 cents today in New South Wales and in Queensland. So the $14 a week, gone. That's why I'm blowing up, because I saw this with Morrison and Frydenberg, and I say this now with Albo and Chalmers. These numbers are always so small about what the individual ends up getting, but it's the politician who says, oh, how good am I because I've given you a bucket to throw at the bushfire. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give them the credit for that. Yeah, Matt, your turn, yeah?
Well, Paul, just to try and, depoliticise this a little bit, right? I mean, the solution here is we've got to grow a stronger economy. We've got to adopt policies which can grow people's incomes, which can get costs down to get inflation down, not just inflation down, get actual prices down. A lower inflation number doesn't mean prices go down. They're just going up by less than they were before. That's hard work, and it's not as easy a sell. But the most disappointing thing of the past week is this government has given up, basically, on any kind of proper economic reform to deliver those results. Because you're absolutely right, Paul. Anything the government can do through handouts to the 12 million odd taxpayers in Australia is never going to be able to touch the sides. They cannot afford to give the vast bulk of people anything like $200 extra a week. That would blow the budget. We'd go bankrupt very, very quickly. Correct. And so the only way we can actually deliver better economic results for Australian families is to have a better economy. And there's nothing the government can point at right now they're doing to deliver a better economy, and lower taxes, getting red tape off businesses, getting power prices down, all these things. That's what needs to be done. And there's just no agenda there.
Now, for those that are sitting at home saying, come on, OK, Paul, we get it. Mercy, mercy, mercy. All right, mercy. Time to change the subject. Which is, let's talk about protesting, right, in all of its different forms, and there are causes that we find despicable through to causes that we are unmoved by, right? And obviously I understand that the individuals are not exactly the same, but the idea of people thinking if I take to the streets I'll change everyone else's mind is just garbage. Normal, reasonable people I don't think are moved by it, like the idiots who decided to throw the soup at the Mona Lisa, or the neo-Nazis that ended up chanting on a bus. Now, again, I'm not saying climate protesters are neo-Nazis, so don't run off to the umpire here. But what I am saying is that when people take to the streets on Invasion Day and say things like decolonise, or when people take to the streets and say from the river to the sea, which obviously can be, not so subtly decoded, I just don't think normal people are moved by protest anymore. I think that when we see a poll or when we see, our mates saying something on social media, it might be slightly different. But Nicholas, you understand the power of protest. I understand free speech, meaning people have the right to association and free protest. But I think that when it's a nutter who wants to shut down the Sydney Harbour Bridge because unless we all turn the lights off, we're all going to die, or it's the person who marches on Australia Day saying that, that we must decolonise, or, these sorts of this idea that this is kind of, unless you follow my extremist version of the world coming to an end in the next 6 months, then everyone must go, everyone must die, everyone must change. These people, they don't even understand where the bulk of Australians are, and they're not going to be able to do what they think they can do, which is to carry on like well-funded toddlers and just keep yelling at us until we give them a chocolate at the supermarket. It's not going to happen.
Well, look, this is such a fantastically interesting topic. I feel like you and I should almost do a lecture at the university on this. And
I'll be there. I look forward to the protests about the discussion of protests.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me begin by saying, yes, a protest is an extreme act, almost by definition. It has to be, doesn't it? Because you're sort of saying, look, the parliamentary process of lawmaking, the usual way we go about changing laws or regulations is not working, and so people take to the streets to have their voice heard.
It's just not what
by
they want.
definition, it's almost an extreme act. But that doesn't mean that the views that are expressed in protests are always extremist, and it certainly doesn't mean that protests can't be very, very effective as well. Now, I despise just as much as you do the idiots that, throw red paint on statues of Queen Victoria or act in a violent way. In fact, I get more angry about them than probably you do, Paul, because often, on things like climate action, that's something I really believe in. And when I see those idiots doing that, I know they're harming the cause. They're setting us back. So I get really angry about it. Having said that, I also think that there's been some examples of protests starting to have an effect. I do think that the Australia Day protests, just the size of them, in Melbourne we had 35,000 people out on the streets. Most capital cities around the country had tens of thousands of people. It does start to seep into the national consciousness.
It's a public holiday and 1.9 million people vote Greens. If they did it in the middle of a work day or a Saturday or something that disrupts their life. So I'm not saying they don't believe in it, but who is it supposed to convince? That's my issue, which is, Matt, is that I get it, right? Society's changed and things that we thought were absolute core values change sort of generation to generation, but the want here is that it should be changing day to day. And it's about whenever you get to that place, and look, again, I can be strident and strong on this show and gladly will be, but once you get to that sort of silly space in your head where unless you agree with me, you should go, right? I.e., for your race, for your religion, for your part of a modern Australia, or because you're doing damage to the climate. Those people don't convince anyone. They don't convince anyone.
Well, yeah, I think it hurts the cause. You saw the protests on Australia Day at Parliament House. They clearly want to change the country, not change the Australia Day date. And that's the people that want to change the date are associating with those people. And I just want to make, though, two very quick comments on the Louvre incident, Paul. Number one, I was thinking, why don't they ever throw soup at modern art? And perhaps that's because you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. If they threw soup at modern art, how would you even know? Secondly, somewhat more concerning to me is not the protesters. They're sort of idiots and they're doing harm to their own cause. This must be sanctioned by authorities. Because I was there for the first time at the Louvre
good point.
6 months ago. Wonderful place. Amazing art.
Where's the security guards?
There's no way you can get there and that close to that without the authorities assisting and being in cahoots, and that's more concerning than the protesters themselves.
That's a great point. And this whole idea about what you police and what you look the other way, again, perfect example about it here. And again, I know that we're getting into a nuanced conversation, but we're all adults and we can have it, right? Which is, I love that the Premier of New South Wales came out and said about those neo-Nazi people. You should be named, exposed as the racists you are. Well, what about the naming and the exposing of the people who screamed out, "Gas the Jews"? I mean, I want all of that. Literally, the police were able to stop the neo-Nazis.
What about Antifa? They go around in masks.
But this is it, right? So the police
violence to people.
So the police were able to watch these blokes on the train and to contain them. Yet when people turned up on October 8 at the Sydney Town Hall, police said, there's too many of them to stop, as they moved their way down to the Opera House. And that, Nicholas, is the issue here, right? Which is that, obviously, we have seen the authoritarian state that tells us not to leave our house because of the Wu flu, right? So we know that if the state wants to keep us somewhere, they can keep it, right? They've all got the resources, and we all don't want a scenario where as soon as somebody picks up a protest sign, they're going to be nabbed by the police. But to these people that are on the extremes that are not about protest, but they're about intimidation, why not use the same tactics on all groups that clearly you can deploy on one group if you want to?
Look, Paul, I don't agree that the police play favourites in these things. I don't think they go, softer on one extremist group than another. I just don't think that stacks up to serious analysis. I mean, let's face it, the neo-Nazis are about as vile as you can possibly conjure up. And
correct. And someone screaming "Gas the Jews"
so, the
is
police are going to come out
the same, and they believe in the same thing about Jews.
So that was pure evil, those claims. But I think the police got caught out on that one. They weren't expecting it, whereas the neo-Nazis, everybody knew they were coming, and so they got prepared and they got out and stopped them as they should have. I mean, I'm not saying that one group's worse than the other. I think they're both equally evil, and I think the police do treat it that way. And I think your suggestion that maybe they're, I don't know, softer on the extreme left compared to the extreme right, I don't think that stacks up to serious analysis.
All I could say is, can any of us remember any of the people being paraded or being identified for their roles in October 8? No, but no doubt, and rightly so, we will end up knowing some names of some of the people involved in the stuff in Sydney in the past couple of days. All right, quick break, back with more, including apparently people are literally hoarding cash. Are you one of those people? Is the senator or the future senator, if he keeps loyal to the cause? We'll talk to them both next. Reserve Bank came out with an interesting report today. Again, it's about how people use cash. I'll give you more details about that tomorrow. But there was one little sliver that made it across most of the news today, which was about the number of Australians who are holding on to banknotes. Now, they still remain legal tender, despite the fact that about 85% of things now are all tap and go, creating, presumably, hundreds of millions of dollars of extra profits for the banks. Matt Canavan and Nicholas Reece. I want to talk about this because, Matt, we know some changes meant that the cash transactions over $10,000 in cash, that was stopped. People, frankly, just don't have it on them anymore, so now it's all about tap and go. But why would people be literally hoarding cash?
Well, I think the answer is relatively simple, and that's just there's a distrust of institutions. And sometimes a legitimate distrust of given what we've seen in the past few years. So in that environment, people rush back to what they view as a secure form of store of wealth. I just need to correct you, though, carefully that the coalition proposed, the former coalition government proposed getting rid of cash transactions.
It was killed off.
But we didn't proceed with it.
You killed it off.
We didn't go through with it, but you're right. That fed into concerns with raising these issues of taking away your ability to use cash. There's been talk, obviously, of central bank digital currencies. Other major figures out there saying we should all have carbon budgets on our bank accounts. Correct. Once we have too many stakes a month, we can't have any more. Now, Nick will probably dismiss these as saying scare campaigns, but these are serious people making these suggestions, and it's not then stupid for people to go and think, well, maybe I should hoard some cash to make sure I avoid this if it is to come, even if it's just a small risk. Now, unfortunately for people who are doing this, it hasn't been a great financial decision because inflation takes away the value of cash as you hold it. But that's just another reason why people are getting more and more distrustful of the monetary institutions which have failed in Western societies for the last decade.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, also, Nicholas, again, is that you've heard some of the things that Matt was talking about, and particularly the digitisation of things, digital currencies, right? Today, Bank West, which is a smaller bank that is owned, I think, by the Commonwealth Bank, no more branches, right? We know that people's physical use of cash has changed. I've got a heart out in literally 90 seconds, but what do you think's going on here?
Well, look, I think it all plays into this broader mood of kind of end of days. You know, I think since COVID, people have become more fearful. I think there's some concerns around trust in institutions. People are worried about what happened to them. You see these US tech billionaires building bunkers for themselves for sort of end-of-world apocalyptic events. And I think there's a little bit of sentiment there amongst Aussies about, hey, could I be a cyber attack? Could there be another lockdown of some sort? I'm just going to have a bit of cash under the mattress just to help me out in those circumstances. And with the rise of electronic currency, yeah, it's obviously affecting the way banks, who are apex capitalists, let's face it, go about running their business, and that means they're closing branches, sadly.
Yeah, particularly, look, you know, again, starts with Bank West, and then we'll see what happens. Regional areas, we know what becomes affected, and older people, they get screwed over here. Lads, appreciate it. Let's forward to talking to you both again very, very soon. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Nick. All right, so reminder, you can always find us on socials. Just go searching for Paul Murray Live. But more importantly, you can find us at skynews.com.au. Now, of course, if you're at skynews.com.au and you want to spread the word about how people can watch us on the website, watch us on their phone, there's a new $5 subscription model that is there for those people. So spread the word. So you're, of course, the most loyal watching us on Foxtel, but let's spread the word so even more people can see it via skynews.com.au. Also, podcasts, all the rest of it. The whole point is that it's great that you and I are in this conversation each and every night, but we want to make sure that as many people beyond it hear what we have to say before, of course, the government tries to censor the internet. Haven't forgotten that one. More in a sec. Geez, isn't Nikki Haley having a fun time on the American political circuit?
Only way we will get that done.
No new wars. I'm done with the military-industrial complex.
None of us want new wars. None of us want new wars.
Where's your money coming from? Reed Hoffman or LinkedIn. We know where your money's coming from, Nikki. We know. And we're sick of the wars. We want America first.
And she's getting lapped in her home state of South Carolina. Good luck, Nikki. Here's the late debate.